Hello, hello, and welcome to Old Women Who Write. I'm Jean Palin, and I'm here today with a very special guest. Her name, I call her Wojo, but the world knows her as Michelle Wojciechowski. Um, Michelle is a really interesting person. She is a freelance journalist and a very successful one who seems, if I'm right, to do mostly interviews with interesting people. But she's been a stand-up comedian. She had a national award-winning book called Next Time They'll Carry Me Out in a Box. She writes a newsletter, a comic newsletter called Wojo's World. And she's just all-around fascinating person. So now, before I actually talk to Wojo, I just want to explain this. This is new. This is a new adornment I've been wearing recently. I have COPD and have had a long siege of bronchitis and exacerbation, which has left me doing this. It is my fond hope that this is temporary and that I will not have to wear it all the time. But for now, I do. So this is my coming out party, coming out with the accoutrement. So, so Wojo, welcome. I'm glad you're here.
Hi, thanks. Thanks for having me. And just in case people look for it, my book's actually called Next Time I Move, They'll Carry Me Out in a Box.
Oh, of course it is.
Left out
I wrote
move.
it down wrong. Right,
It
that's
kind
the
of doesn't make the joke if you put next time they can carry me out in a box.
no,
Next
it
time I
doesn't.
move, they'll carry me out in a box. I'm never moving again.
Makes a whole lot more
So
sense. Now, explain. I met Wojo. God, it's been probably 20 years ago.
it's been a long time. Not quite 20, but yeah, well,
Two
over a
friends and I,
decade.
I think it was two friends and I wrote a
Yep.
book, a couple books, and we came to do a book event at an organization that Wojo was part of, and they graciously invited us to come present our book to.
Yeah.
And so we met there. And ever since, oh, almost ever since then, I've been following Wojo on Facebook because I enjoy her. So if we seem to know each other, we sort of do know each other.
A little bit.
Oh, tell me how you primarily, professionally now, consider yourself. Are you a writer? Are you a comedian? Are you
Oh,
a
I'm primarily a writer, and an editor. I do everything from edit a local newsletter for a horticulture organization to I will edit books for people. I'm actually an editor who enjoys doing proofreading. So a friend of mine, a lot of people don't like it, and I always feel like, hey, I get to read a book and correct things and catch the which I do in library books anyway, but I would never admit to making the changes in library books because that would be very wrong,
you're
very, very
defacing
wrong.
public property?
And a good friend of mine is the manager of our local library. So I always say to her, I admit to nothing, but people need to know what's correct. So that's what I do primarily. Primarily, I write. I also do some editing when I can get it because I love it. And when, for fun, I do stand-up comedy. I've written and performed it since I was 18. I did it on a dare, which is very unlike me. I was never like one of those kids who you said, hey, I'll dare you to do this. No, it was just, so I performed in my senior folly show and I got heckled by a friend and by one of the teachers. And I didn't know to be scared, Gene,
Yeah.
because you're young and kind of stupid, kind of green. So I had comebacks for them and it was good. It was good. So I just did a show last week. I performed with a national headliner, Dat Fan. He won the first NBC's Last Comic Standing.
Oh,
So I
wow.
performed with a bunch of local comics up at the Havre de Grace Opera House. So it was fun. It was a lot of fun.
Wow. Now, for those
Comedian
who
named Tom
want to
Myers put it
go see
together.
you perform in the area, you live in Baltimore or the Baltimore area, right?
The Baltimore area and Baltimore County.
Yeah, yeah. Okay.
Mhm.
So anybody in that part of the country, keep your eyes open. For
Mhm.
by Wojo. I have to tell you, every time I watch a comedian, when they step out on stage, I feel immediately such compassion for them because I would think that that moment, that first moment of standing there, for me, would be the most frightening thing in the world. Not knowing how the audience is going to react to you. Well, listen, let's get
It's
off topic. Did you watch Mrs. Oh, come on Netflix. No, on Amazon Prime.
Oh, Mrs. Maisel.
Mrs. Maisel.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Well, I felt that for Mrs. Maisel every time she stepped on stage. I was like, oh gosh, I hope everything goes well for you.
But it's funny. If I feel anxiety at all during that, it's before I step on stage.
Oh,
Once I step on stage, I'm golden. I'm
wow.
golden. You just because you feed off the energy of the people. I've been doing it so long. Um, it's it just it's where I feel very comfortable.
Wow. Wow.
I love public speaking, which, my husband is the complete opposite. He probably just short of want to be in front of a firing squad rather than speak in public.
Wow.
And, I can speak to anyone, anywhere, as long as it's something I have some knowledge about. And actually you brought up Mrs. Maisel. I interviewed Maureen Hinkle, who played Rose, her mom, a number of
Really?
times.
Oh my
Yes,
goodness.
very, very kind woman.
Oh my goodness. Oh,
And I interviewed, actually, years ago, I interviewed Tony Shalhoub for Parade
oh my
online, and that
gosh.
was, yeah,
Such
he's
a
very nice.
fabulous actor. He
He
is
is. He
fabulous.
is.
Wow. Okay. Now take us back. How did you get started freelance writing?
Huh. Well, it's not a normal story, which I would think you wouldn't expect
No, I
me to
wouldn't.
have a normal story. Um, I had been working in public relations. I got out of college. I ended up getting a job in public relations. And because I could do it, I had done it in summer internships and things like that. But I really wanted to be a writer. And I knew from high school I wanted to be a writer. But I did not major in journalism. I majored in writing and English, which was very different when I went to Loyola University in Maryland. Um, and I was laid off from my PR job. I work for a nonprofit. I was laid off. It was ridiculous. I was trying to get a PR job for so long. I mean, I was volunteering on a committee. I co-chaired like a statewide PR conference. I remember walking into a meeting with a bunch of my resumes, and this guy, Mark, said, Michelle, I think everyone in the state of Maryland has your resume by now, you know? So this was so long ago, I was attending a young professionals meeting at one point with a friend of mine. And we were sitting in the garden of this place afterward, and she said, if you could do anything in the world, what would you do? And I said, I would be a writer. And she said, why aren't you doing it?
Oh,
Now, rewind a little bit. When I was working in PR, my late mother worked at City Hall. So I was used to my whole life going to political events and campaigns and fundraisers and things like that. And I was at one, I ran into a young woman I had gone to high school and college with. She was with a local editor and publisher whom she was working for, and it's a now defunct. Many of the publications that I started with are prefaced by the words now defunct. But it was a community newspaper, and the editor, I reached out to her for publicity for the place I was working for. And she said, Lisa told me you're a really good writer and you're very funny and we'd like to have you write for us. I said, no, no, no. It's so funny in retrospect. I turned him down like 3 times.
goodness
And
sakes.
finally, how it came about was I pitched them a story about these international camp counselors that were working at this camp for children and adults with disabilities.
Mhm.
Um, for this nonprofit I was working for. And Claire, the editor, said to me, well, we're past our deadline. However, if you can go and if you can do the story and take some pictures, we will print the story. I said, well, okay, we want the publicity. Well, I went up. It was Camp Greentop. It was up near Camp David, drove up. My mom went with me because it was before GPS. I didn't know where I was going, it was crazy. Um, Interviewed these 5 guys from all over the world, wrote a story about it, spent all day Sunday writing it. Within the last hour, scrapped everything, rewrote the whole thing,
Mhm.
and took it by disc, which is what we did back then, pre-internet, to the editor and gave her photos as well. They not only loved the story, they published it on the front page.
Oh my gosh.
And she really kept after me then. So I talked with my boss and we laid down some ground rules. So for example, since I was doing public relations, the lines are a little more blurred nowadays, but back then things were very clear. If you did PR, you didn't do writing, or if you did PR, you didn't, like for example, my agreement was I would not write about anything regarding the disabilities field.
Oh my
And I
God.
certainly would write about, but I could write about anything. So the first thing I covered was a now long closed restaurant had opened its basement doing stand-up comedy, which I wasn't in, but I wrote about. And then I wrote about a John Lennon lithograph exhibit that came downtown to downtown Baltimore. I just got started from there, and eventually I, I learned by doing.
Yes.
And I mean, I had taken writing classes in college, art of the argument, um, art of the essay, different classes like that. But I hadn't done straight journalism. I'd done travel writing, I'd done all this other stuff. So I basically learned on the fly. And I loved it. And I loved meeting people. And I loved talking. And, to this day, what I always say to people is, I get paid. Okay, well, let me start off. I get to go and find out about interesting people, whether it's the local Joe or a celebrity. I
Mhm.
get to ask them about something in their lives. They tell me. I get to write it and tell other people, and they pay me for it. And to this day, I say, how did I get this job? This is just so amazing. I mean, sometimes I'll pitch stories. Years ago, I had gotten rosacea. So I was writing for a wellness publication. What did I do? I pitched a story on rosacea. So I found out all these things about it that I could learn. You know what I mean? And I pitch a lot of stories that I personally want to know about.
Mhm.
And, I just hope they don't catch up with me and realize what a wonderful job it is and they pay me to do this, you know?
I hear you. And let me ask for people who are women who are watching this and who may be interested in or have put their toes in the water but haven't
Mhm.
pursued it. What I think I hear you saying is that once you have an assignment or have made a contact,
Mhm.
then you pitch ideas to them.
It goes
You,
both ways.
oh, does it? Okay.
Yes, it goes both ways. Sometimes for some clients, I'm solely assigned things because they want particular stories. For others, I solely pitch. For others, it goes both ways.
I,
So, and it varies. I've written for everyone from Esquire to Vanity Fair to Parade to I've
wow.
read a lot for PBS's Next Avenue,
Wow.
which is for Gen X and up, Gen X boomers,
Mhm.
the silent generation, that kind of thing, or the greatest generation. I can't remember which one goes next. But yeah, so I do both.
Wow. Well, you clearly have become very well established in the field. And
Thank you.
do you see that that has been a process?
Oh
Moving
yeah.
hand up,
Oh
always
yeah.
getting known that your work was good, that your work was reliable, that you were reliable at meeting deadlines, and it's just grown organically. Is that?
Absolutely. It doesn't happen overnight for
Yeah.
most people. I mean, I'm sure there are some things out there where someone did one story and boom, I've known writers. I know a lot of writers and they not all of them came from a journalism background. That's not to say that that's wrong, but I know a journalist who was a lawyer, decided she didn't like it, pitched her first piece ever to Cosmo. They accepted it and boom, she was gone. She was going. So I know a lot who used to be nurses. I mean, it doesn't, just because you haven't grown up writing, just because you haven't written your entire life, it doesn't mean you can't be a writer. I'm fully in support of reestablishing yourself, of doing different things, of doing, I even challenge myself now and try different, I'll pitch to different clients. I'll pitch different kinds of stories. But there are certain things that once you get to a certain point in your career, I don't write about finances for the most part. I don't write about taxes. I don't write about retirement, usually. Once in a while, but for the most part now.
Hmm.
So,
Well, when you're in a situation where the client contacts you, or no,
mhm.
let me back up from that a minute. I don't want to go there.
Okay.
Am I right that the majority of pieces you write now are interviews, that you've become well known for interviews?
Well, with most journalism stories, you have to conduct interviews. So if I'm writing for Baltimore, are you talking about Q&As, like question and answer
No, I'm
sort of
talking about
things, or
celebrities that somebody asks you.
that's I do a lot of that, and it's not the gossipy kind. It's,
Right,
it's the what are you doing? What did you like about this? Tell me about this and that and the other thing.
right.
Um,
What percentage of
um,
your time is with the interview format rather than the talk about rosacea format?
I probably do mostly stories that are interviews. Now, that doesn't mean interviews solely with celebrities. I
Yeah,
write for a continuing care retirement community company, and I interview people who are residents at their retirement communities,
oh, that's neat.
all the time.
Yeah,
I write about nurses for some nursing publications. I write about chiropractors and their things for some. I tell people, I write about things you've heard of, like Reader's Digest, and I write about very specialty things that you may not have heard of.
yeah,
I've written about physical therapy since 1997. Some of that is interview, some of it's interview with a mix of evidence-based practice and research and things like that.
right.
So it's, I do a lot of interviews. Now, that said, I recently did a humor column for PBS's Next Avenue. It was called the music of my adolescence, now playing in all five, about how when I went to the grocery store and suddenly heard David Bowie's Modern Love and nearly had apoplexy and dropped dead because the grocery store is where my mother's and my grandmother's music is playing. It is not where my music is playing. But
Okay.
and I like writing essays. I like writing personal pieces as well. So I kind of I interview a lot of people. Some of them go as Q&As, which means I get it. I record all of my interviews.
What do
That's
you mean
personal
those as
preference.
Q&As? I don't know what you mean by that.
Okay, a Q&A is a question and answer.
Yeah,
So what I do is there are times in which I will talk to, it can be a celebrity, it doesn't have to be. I will conduct an interview, ask them questions, they give me answers. I record it on my handy dandy Olympus digital
I
recorder.
still have one of those.
Yeah, I prefer it to my phone, just because it would use up so much of I'd be charging my phone all the time. And I upload it to a transcription service I use, CLK Transcription. They send me the transcription back, and that's where my editing skills come in. I write an introductory paragraph, and then it's my question and their answer,
I see. I see.
edited for clarity and usually length,
Right. Yeah.
because people, sometimes we talk a lot, and we can't include all, there have been times where I've gotten 6,000 word transcripts that I have to cut down to 1,500 words. You want to talk about a challenge?
I recently I read the interview you did with Lou Diamond Phillips.
Mhm.
Lou Diamond Phillips. Yeah. And I was taken by the realness of it,
Mhm.
by the vulnerability in it,
Mhm.
um, and by the way you handled it and the questions you asked and the responses you gave. The the when you, you get were you contacted to do that interview by somebody?
No. Well, first of all, I'll be straight up front. That was the third interview I've done with Lou.
Really?
Okay, the first one I did with him was on a now defunct website. The second one was with Esquire years ago, a couple of years ago. And the third one was the one you've read most recently in the Boca Raton Observer. So that said, um, he's developed a feeling of trust with me.
Yes, I see.
Okay, because he knows that I'm in it not for, the glitz and glamour, like who's the hot young thing you were working with,
Yeah.
because I don't care. I want to know what makes him tick. So I pitched the story to the Boca Raton Observer. They checked into it, they okayed it, and then I get a number of words, and sometimes they'll give me a direction. Like for that particular issue of the magazine, it was the men's issue each year. So I asked him some things about, being a father, about
Yeah.
what it's like as he's gotten older and how his career has changed and what he enjoys and does he like being a mentor and that kind of thing.
That,
So,
that's where I was going with all those questions was like in that interview, it was very moving. He spoke a lot about his racial heritage, his national heritage,
mhm,
about what it meant, how it has played out over the years in his
mhm.
acting career. And what,
Oh, that was a piece for Esquire. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
that's the one.
he talked specifically.
Yes.
That was something he had brought up with me at the previous interview I had done.
Ah,
Um, so for example, which was not the topic of my story for that interview, but he said to me, he had only played a Pacific Islander, a Filipino American
yeah,
character twice in his life. And in both of those times, it was because the first time he wrote the part,
right.
and the second time he was on a great and unfortunately canceled show called Prodigal Son on Fox, and he played a police detective, the head, I believe, of the detective unit. And when they were doing kind of the backstory for his character, he said, "Hey, could he be Filipino American?" And they said, well, sure. And what would, and unfortunately the show was canceled before it had two seasons, but before they could really get into what that meant,
Yeah,
that was going to be the next stage. But yeah, he's played every other
right.
practically, you know, cultural person. He would joke that at the time in Hollywood, he was the brown guy, so, but he did a lot of things with respect. And so, for example, if he played, he was in Longmire, which is a fabulous series. If you get the chance to, it's one of my favorite roles he's ever played. He played Henry Standing Bear, and he played a member of an American Indian tribe, which is actually, I did a story about Indigenous people, and that is the late. So if people are saying, no, it's Native American, this is what I was told. So I'm just using the proper terminology I was most recently told. Anyway, he will go on his own dime to reservations of that type and talk to people and
Right,
find out, what is your culture like? Would you do this? Would you do that?
right.
Would you not do this? Would you not do that? How can I present? And he's done it when he played Richie Valens, his huge breakout role.
Yeah.
He played one of the Chilean miners in a great movie, unfortunately not marketed enough, called The 33. You
Mhm.
want to find a great movie based on true story? And he's always looked into that. So that's what I wanted to get into. That's what I wanted to ask him about. That's why I got the idea from the previous story I did, and then I pitched an editor I had met at Esquire. But see, here's the thing, Gene. My mind never stops. I'm always thinking. My husband jokes that even when we go on vacation, I have a pad of paper, a little pad in my purse because I can't help coming up with ideas.
Yes.
And one of the goals I have in life is to, one, read every book in my home. We'll see if that happens. And to write every idea. I have folders and folders full of ideas around here,
Wow.
because I just can't stop coming up with ideas.
Right. Right.
Well, at this stage in the game, I know what I'm good at and what I'm not.
Well, let me ask this.
Mhm.
That was clearly, I mean, your experience with him in the several interviews was very whole and successful and good for both of you. That was clear.
Sure.
Um, have you had what you would consider unsuccessful interviews? And if so, why? What was it about them?
Over my whole career, yes. Not so much with celebrities because they're usually used to being interviewed,
Yeah.
but a lot of times, and I take this, I treat everyone I interview the same, with the same amount of respect, the same amount of, the same interest, because my feeling is, and actually years ago I interviewed Sam Elliott, who does have a wonderful voice.
Other,
And one, I know. And one of the things he said to me was, Michelle, well, he said, Michelle, but he said, actors he said we're just regular people with very strange careers. And so there have been times in my career when I've interviewed someone who's never been interviewed before. You
Mhm.
know, I when I was in PR, I used to do a newsletter for the organization, and I remember this woman, Angie, nicest woman, talked could talk your ear off till the day is long. We decided to feature her in the newsletter as one of the volunteers. I go to ask her questions, and it's like deer in the headlights.
Right.
You know, so I would have to get information from her when she didn't know I was getting information from her. And it was a different thing because she got to see the story, which in journalism you don't. But it's very tricky when you can tell the person, and it's also part of my responsibility to make sure I'm not just asking yes no questions. Questions that can be answered by a yes or no. You know, if I do ask a question like that and they say, well, yes or no, I'll say why. Tell me
Yeah.
about that. You know, and sometimes, you know, one of the reasons I record my interviews is because my interviews, it's important for me to have an interview be a conversation.
Yes.
It makes people relaxed. They forget,
Yes.
you know, and not that I want them to forget I'm recording so I can get them and have a light on them or something, you know, not by any means, but just to get them to relax. And I always say to them, you know, this is going to be fun. It's painless. You know, if I had to, for example, sing to them, that would not be a good thing. You would not want me singing. But interviews, I know how to do
Yeah.
well.
I would tell you, I one time did an interview. I had a little internet radio show years ago
Hmm.
called,
Hmm.
I don't know, it was about old women. Even then, I was writing about old women. And I interviewed Betty Friedan. I was living in
Oh,
DC,
wow.
living in DC. Well, Betty did not want to be interviewed on that day, and she was wrapped up in a fur coat and a fur hat, and it was about 80 degrees outside. And so I started out talking with her. I had read every book. I was so prepared. I was so in awe and interested, and I was getting, I don't know, yeah, no.
Wow.
And I finally just said, Betty, this would be the participatory part. And it's like,
And sometimes you have to do that. You have to be real,
and
you
something
know?
went click, and she started talking. She,
Yep.
but it
Yep.
was a moment for sure, for
And
sure.
sometimes you know, you have to be real with
Yeah,
people. Something I say to a lot of celebrities is I'll say, you know, there's no BS with me. If I give you a compliment, it's a compliment. You
yes,
know, if I didn't like something, you know, a show they did or something, I'm not going to bring it up unless it's what they've talked about. And they're certainly not going to ask me, well, did you like it? Because,
right.
you know, that's not what we're going for. But yeah, sometimes you just have to. You have to dig into your bag of
Yeah,
tricks, so to speak, you know, or you have to figure a way out.
yeah.
Because
And
there are
do
times where
you
people,
do, are most of the interviews that you do by phone? I mean,
yes,
okay, so you
yes.
don't feel any uncomfortability, blah, 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 whatever that word is,
Being uncomfortable.
yeah,
Um,
without seeing the person or being able to make the visual connection.
um, I've done them for so long
Yeah.
that I don't have a problem doing, and during COVID, that's what you had to do. Now, that said, sometimes when I interview celebrities, they request that we do a Zoom call because they want to
Yes.
see me, they want that interaction. When I've written certain stories, when I wrote the piece for Esquire, you have to describe what the person's wearing and what they're doing, kind of thing.
Uh-huh.
So since I couldn't be in Vancouver when Lou Diamond Phillips was filming in Vancouver during COVID,
Yeah.
you know, we set up a Zoom call and then I could see what he was wearing and I could take notes and I could, you know, go from that.
Makes
But
sense.
I'm just as comfortable to, you know, talking with you today
Yeah.
as I would be on the phone. The only difference is if I'm talking to someone on the phone, I don't have to put makeup on and I can be in the clothes I slept in if need be.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So,
That's- Listen, who was your favorite interview ever?
oh God. I don't think I can limit it to one. A bunch of them. Um, I would say Mel Brooks. he ate a donut while we talked, and at the end, he asked me if I could tell he was eating a Danish, and I said yes, I could, and he told me it was a delicious cinnamon one. And he said, "Why didn't you say something, Michelle?" And I said, "Because short of if you were in the bathroom, I would interview you no matter what." Um, Carl Reiner, the late Carl Reiner, was such a kind man. And I was interviewing him about one of his books that he was putting out. And he said, "Do you have any of my books, Michelle?" And I said, "I'm going to be honest, sir. No, I don't." And he said, "We're taking care of that right now." And he got his assistant over. He sent me in the mail. I emailed his assistant my mailing address. Within a week, I had personally inscribed copies of every single one of his books.
Oh my goodness.
Um, Carol Kane is hilarious. She's great.
I haven't heard of
Um,
her for a while. Yes.
yeah,
That's a
she's been in
funny
some things.
woman.
She was in Hunters, which was it was an Amazon series.
Oh,
And I'm trying to think of um some other things she's been in. I've interviewed her about a lot of different things, and so I know her dog and her dog's name because her dog's barked. Maren Hinkle I interviewed, who played Rose in Mrs. Maisel, and she also played Alan's wife on Two and a Half Men.
oh,
Yeah, so she's been great. I've interviewed her a number of times. Lou Diamond Phillips is the nicest guy on Twitter. If people are on social media, he is so kind. And he's kind in real life. He's a very nice guy. So I'm just bringing people up, but I don't have many interviews I don't like.
right.
It's kind of fun because growing up, you put the posters on your walls of these guys you have crushes on. I've interviewed a number of them, and it's really funny now. Like at some point, I think I'll do an essay about conducting the interviews with the guys I used to drool over, you know?
Yeah.
I interviewed someone from Duran Duran. I was so excited. But people ask me if I get scared, and I don't, because this is my job. This is what I do. I get excited,
Right.
but I'm never unprofessional because of that excitement. Now, when I interviewed Sam Elliott, I will not lie. I hung up the phone and I went, "Ah, that voice,"
Yes.
and he was
Yes.
he was very, very kind. Um, but
Wow.
yeah, I interviewed Ralph Macchio, and I was growing up with the Karate Kid and stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, but
Well, let me ask, 'cause we are, believe it or not, we have been on here for 30 minutes already.
uh,
Um, you
I
have
am a talker.
you have any unfulfilled ambitions yet for yourself?
Yes,
What?
I want to get some humor published in the New Yorker
Oh,
or on the New Yorker's website.
mhm.
And I've been working on some different things. It comes down to, you know, when COVID initially happened, I lost a lot of work, like a lot of journalists, freelancers, and there was a bit of a panic. And then the last couple of years, 2.5 years since, I've gotten so much work. And I think that the biggest struggle that freelancers have sometimes is, for example, and I also want to write for Smithsonian Magazine. Love that magazine. And I've got some ideas, and I've pitched them before, and we'll do some pitches until I grind them down and they, no, I'm kidding. I just have to find the right pitch.
Yeah.
But I've read the New Yorker since I was in college, and I've always wanted to, E.B. White is my favorite essayist of all time. People don't realize, besides his children's books, he wrote books and books and books of essays, and he worked for the early New Yorker. But what happens, one of the difficult parts as a journalist is you get so much paying work, and I am at the point where I'm hoping by the end of the summer I will be able to put in time each week where I get to work on my passion projects, because it's difficult, when people are coming with you, because the projects are fun that they're paying me for, so it's not just, oh, I've got to get the cash. It's,
Right.
wow, that's a great, yeah, you're gonna pay me. Sure, I'll do that. That's an exciting story. So it's just a matter of fitting some time in my schedule. But
And
I
you will.
always want, I always, always want to have unfulfilled ambitions,
Yes.
because it keeps it exciting in
Right.
this business.
Yes.
I just a
In
little over a
any
year ago,
business.
I started writing for Baltimore Magazine again, and I have gotten to write some of the coolest local profiles. You know,
Wow.
one of the last butchers in town who's an actual butcher. It's not like you go to his
Right.
grocery store and it's prepackaged. And two guys who started, they're a little younger than I am, who've started a vinyl store, a record store. You
Right.
know, it's cool. I love what I do. Now, in those cases, I did actually go to the places because post COVID, you know, you can go out and do that
Yes.
stuff now. And I need to be able to write more
They're
descriptions.
local. Yeah.
Yeah,
Got it.
yeah.
Right. Well,
Well,
Michelle,
Gene, I've just talked you and your viewers or listeners' ears off, but that's
I'm,
kind of how I am.
it's been absolutely delightful. It has been really wonderful. I can't even imagine why I waited so long to have you be here because you're perfect person to,
I'm a delight, Gene. I'm a delight.
you are a delight.
I love
Absolutely.
talking about my work.
I just went to a drag show the other night, and the
Oh,
star of the
nice.
drag show was called Delighted to Be Here.
Oh, that's
So,
great.
yeah,
That's
so that
awesome.
stays in my mind. I'm delighted to have you here. So
Well, if
thank you.
any of your people want to, you know, follow me on Twitter, I'm at the Michelle with one L, Michele, Wojo, the Michelle Wojo. I'm like that on Instagram. I've got a Gmail account with that. And if they ever have questions, you know, when I can, I'll be glad to answer. I wish that people, I now act as the person I wish I had had when I was starting out
Yes,
because I didn't know what I was doing.
yes.
I really didn't have a clue. So if I can make the path a tiny bit easier for people,
Fabulous. Are you okay if I put your like an email address or something? I can talk to you about this afterward.
yeah, okay.
People so they have some way to reach you because
Well, they can reach out to me through my Gmail account. It's the Michelle Wojo at gmail.com.
perfect, perfect. Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And
Thanks
I'm
for
glad
having
to
me
be
on.
here. I know that you've enjoyed talking to Wojo today or listening to Wojo about her career, which is far more extensive than I even knew it was. So um, it's been a delight.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Same here.
Wojo. Bye bye.
Bye.